for being here. I figured we would start, for one thing, congratulations on your book.
Today's release day.
Yay! The party! Hooray, Lemonade War! Just to start, what's the book about?
So the book, the graphic novel, which it's the same as the book that came out 18 years ago, The Lemonade War, which is a story of a brother and a sister, Evan and Jesse, who get into an argument about who can earn the most money selling lemonade in the 5 days before school starts. And it starts out as a bet, and then it turns into like a fierce competition, and then that spirals into this all-out war. It's a winner-take-all kind of situation, so somebody's going to walk away with $100 and somebody's going to walk away with nothing. So what happens is that they start to do things that they wouldn't normally do, because usually they get along really well, but in this situation they find themselves amassing troops with, you know, friends calling on friends, and dirty tricks ensue, and you know, wartime strategy, and it brings out the worst in them, is what I'm saying.
And it's a wonderful book. It's a lot of fun. And when we talked earlier, prior to today's event, we were talking a little bit about your process, and what I thought was really interesting was the reasoning for why you decided to make this a graphic novel in the first place, especially after 18 years.
Yeah, 18 years, crazy. But that's really part of it, because the fact that the book is not only endured, but is actually kind of flourishing, it's selling more today than it did at any time in the past. That's one of the things that kind of is feeding into, you know, there's definitely a trend right now of taking long-term, sort of modern, classic, middle grade novels and turning them into graphic novels. So the idea is to find, come in, we're glad to have you. The idea is to find a new audience, to find kids who might read the prose novel, might read a graphic novel, might read both. So it's just kind of reaching out to kids who have different reading tastes and are interested in accessing a story in a new way. It's exactly the same story, nothing changes, but it changes completely because of how it's told. So some kids like that better. The other reason for doing a graphic novel, I mean, my long-term editor, I had an editor for 20 years, she retired, still haven't gotten over it. And she and I used to get together for dinner a couple times a year, and she'd bring up this new thing that was happening where middle grade novels were being turned into graphic novels. And so we talked about it. We said, how do they do it? How can that be done? You know, a prose novel, how do you turn that into a graphic novel? And so I became intrigued, and I decided I wanted to try, at least, just to try, to see if I could do it with a story that I knew so well. So it was partly the challenge of it. It was partly just kind of seeing if I could do it. And then being just really intrigued with the format. That's what led to me actually doing it.
And I mean, I'm obviously familiar with graphic novel adaptations.
Much more than I am. She's the pro.
Well, I'm in a completely different position of adapting them from the art side, adapting the Babysitter's Club graphic novels. And so, you know, I'm in a similar position of taking something that is, you know, 18 plus years old, and finding a new audience for it, turning it into a different medium.
How much do you change, like the Babysitter's Club? How much does the plot change at all? Because I found that when I was writing the first draft of the script, I'd like go to the prose, I had my book, and Evan walks in the room. Okay, panel 1, Evan walks in the room. And I go back over here, he looks out the window. Okay, panel 2, Evan looks out the window. And so I created like this stop action kind of animation of the prose novel. It was long, it was deadly, it was just, the pacing was all off, and that was one of the main things I had to learn. But I didn't change the plot. I stuck to the plot, I just squished it. And I just wondered, because you've done the Babysitter's Club, I mean, is that something that...
It's largely the same. Maybe it certainly updates.
Okay.
For instance, in Stacy's Mistake, there's a whole B plot that I changed because it didn't age super well.
Yeah.
And in Christy and the Walking Disaster, I reorganized some of the plot points so that there's more of a rising and falling action.
I wonder if it's much easier for somebody who didn't write the story in the first place to let go of it, because I did finally reach a point where I kind of was like, just let go of what you wrote before and just write something new. But
well, that's what I think is so interesting is that you wanted to take your original book, you wanted to maintain ownership of it, and you wanted to turn it into this new medium yourself. And, this being new, you do have a very different understanding of the characters, of the purpose of the book. When I'm reading the Babysitter's Club books, I'm thinking about, okay, what is it that this book is trying to convey, at least in my estimation.
Right.
And that is essentially, it's almost like writing an essay, and you have to keep coming back to the thesis over and over again.
Right.
Whenever I'm adapting something, I'm going back to the thesis of the book and thinking, what is the main thing that I'm trying to get across?
Right.
And so sometimes, and Stacey's Mistake, in the first book that I adapted, I was, except for that B plot, I was very, very true to the beats of the book.
Mm.
And every single time I adapt one, I kind of loosen up a little bit and try to figure out, okay, what's the best visual way to show this particular plot point? How can I not, fill the page just like with a wall of text?
Right.
Because that's, real estate, simply visual real estate on the page is such a thing.
Yeah.
But I think that you did that really, really well in the book.
Thanks.
Where the book is not like heavily laden.
It was the first draft.
I bet.
I lost close to 100 pages just by combining panels, not by dropping anything from the story. Literally just, my editor would write, can these 3 panels be combined into one? And by halfway through the manuscript, I was like, I didn't even need her telling me. I was like, oh my God, these can be combined. These can be. So I lost 100 pages. But even though I had never written a graphic novel script before, there was no way I was letting anybody else do it. I had a feeling that the publisher would come to me and say, oh, we think it's good. And there was no way I was going to have somebody else do it. So I figured I'd better learn how to do it pretty quick.
And you learned from Colleen A.F. Venable, an author that I had worked with.
Yes.
So what was that process like?
So somebody in the audience and I went to a Highlights Foundation workshop. We were both interested. We were just interested in seeing what would it be like to write a graphic novel script.
Highlights as in Highlights magazine, right? So
right, Highlights magazine. They have.
Does anybody read Highlights?
Yeah. So they have a foundation in Pennsylvania, and they do a lot of retreats. They do a lot of wonderful things, just a lot of great stuff. And so they had a 4-day-long weekend retreat for writing the graphic novel. And so I was brand new to it, and my friend knew about it, and so I said I'd love to do that. So off we went, and they were just terrific mentors there. And everything was new to me. It was like everything they were saying, everything coming out of their mouths was like, I never thought of that before. That's brand new. And so it was just sort of a weekend of just lots and lots of just sort of perspective expanding, mind expanding kinds of information. But I will say that on the last day, so Sunday was a half day, and every day that I'd been there, I brought my bike with me. I'd gone for a bike ride. And so on the Sunday, before we were going to all leave at noon, I got up at 6 a.m., I think. And I went riding the rural dirt roads of Pennsylvania. And I got in a bike accident.
Oh, no!
And I completely destroyed my elbow. I broke the bone. I obliterated a ligament. I cut through a tendon. It was really, really bad. So I have forgotten much of that weekend. Like, I know that good things were said. I know that really smart, but I forgot a lot of it. Like, just got wiped out because, well, they put me on just enormous amounts of painkillers. So I really did kind of forget. But it was a great weekend.
My word.
I'm glad I did.
Well, goodness, I was about to ask, what you took away from the weekend,
Not
but
much.
I guess what you took away from was a broken elbow.
A destroyed elbow.
Oh, my goodness. Well, so, you said that when you first started adapting the book, or your original book, when you were just going one-to-one original text to original comics.
Not the way to do it.
And at some point, you kind of decided to, let go. What did that feel like?
A relief. Actually, a relief. And if you asked me that question, if we'd gone back in time, like at the beginning, I was like, no, gotta. Like the book was like my security blanket. I was clutching it, and I was turning each page and just holding on to it, and that felt like that's what I needed. I needed to have something. I do not think I could have written my first graphic novel as an original story. there's so much work that goes into, but there's so many writers in this audience. Why am I even telling any of you? There's so many things that go into building a plot and developing your characters and keeping the action going and all that stuff. There's so much you have to think about, to also have to think about a brand new form, which is what the script was for me. That would have been impossible. I never could have done that. So thank goodness I had this first experience where I had my scaffolding. I had the thing under me that I knew was like, this is the story, these are the characters, this is how we're going to move through it. Now you just have to figure out how to present it in a way so that visually, so that in my head, the illustrator will be able to create it visually. So when I finally realized I don't have to hold so tightly to this security blanket, it was a huge relief.
And was there anything major that changed in the story from the original, or did you
really
have to
the
find
only
a way?
things that changed, and this is going to sound so insignificant, is references to technology from almost 20 years ago. Like in the original, Evan is desperately hoping he can save up enough of this lemonade money to get an iPod, and like nobody has an iPod anymore. Does anybody remember what an iPod is? So now we have him, because the kids in this story don't have any cell phones, and actually there's very little technology in the story, but he is hoping that he'll be able to save up and that his mother will allow him to buy an iPhone. So we changed that. One of the things that stayed the same that was really, really, really fun to be able to like pull over into the graphic novel was some of the metaphors that I had in the original prose. You know, and you'll see something when we do our dramatic reading. That at one point Evan feels like his words, the words he's holding in trying so hard to hold inside, are like bats trying to escape. Well, that's a nice metaphor on the page, and I hope that kids reading it would like create a picture in their heads. But now they actually get to see these bats like breaking out, and so the metaphor is just like right there. And then later in the story, you won't see this, Jessie is described as sitting on her bed. She's trying to lose herself in one of her favorite books, but there's a nagging feeling. There's just this thing, kind of that she just can't shake, even though she's trying really hard to ignore it. And in the picture, we turned it into a purple blob. A certain friend in the audience knows where that comes from, because we've talked about purple blobs on our shoulders before, and it just keeps poking, and she flings it off, and it creeps back up and climbs up and sits on her shoulder again. So it was really, really fun to be able to keep that from the original prose and to just have it shown in such a very different way.
I love that. I was actually going to ask if these
really
little creatures were in the original books.
Yeah, they were. They were there, but they were just metaphors in your head. Now they're just like real things on the page.
Right.
Which is such a fun like boundary you get to break in a graphic novel. You can have that kind of stuff happening.
Yeah, I mean, things can feel very different when you're transforming something into a visual medium, when, like you said, it used to be a metaphor, and now it's literal bats or a literal creature that is inside you coming out. I think it's nice that both of our main characters, Evan and Jessie, have their little creatures inside.
Yeah.
But they're super different characters, and this is going to apply to both the original book as well as the graphic novel. But what made you want to write about these two characters that basically have very different ways of solving problems, very different approaches to the world that they experience?
Right. So I got the idea when my two sons got into a fight about a lemonade stand, and the thing that came out of that was I thought, there's going to be a lemonade war, and that just lodged in my head as a title, The Lemonade War. And I never think of titles first, so that was unusual. But the rest of the story of what actually happened in real life was not a story at all. They got in an argument, and then they stopped having an argument. You can't write a book about that. So I had this idea of a conflict around a lemonade stand, and then it was a question of figuring out, who are these characters going to be that I would build this story on. I wanted them, so in the original thing that happened, two brothers, I decided that I did want them to be siblings. I thought about them being friends. I thought about it being a story about friends, but I thought no, because what I'm interested in looking at is how an argument can have two sides, and how it's really, really important to explore the other side. What's the other person thinking about, and how are they feeling? What did they experience? How did they remember that? So this idea of sort of intense closeness that you get in a family with siblings, my two sisters are here, so suddenly I have to be careful. Okay, let me think carefully. No, I don't have to be careful at all. We grew up, four of us, two sisters, me, and then my little brother. We grew up playing together all the time. We spent an enormous amount of time. We moved around a lot, so every time we moved to a new place, we were the first people we knew in that new place. So we spent a lot of time playing together, but siblings can also get into really big fights. So I was interested in that relationship, a close relationship that then is what leads to the enormity of the conflict between them. And then, because I was exploring how every argument, conflict has two sides, I wanted to make them, I don't want to say polar opposites, but I did want to, definitely distinguish them. Right. So a brother and a sister. One of them, is very sociable. He gets along well, natural leader. The other one has a lot of trouble with social cues. She's never quite sure what do the faces mean? Why do they say it like that? She does very well in school. So they each have their strengths, they each have their weaknesses. They're used to being together, working together, playing together. And now they're in a situation where they're not even speaking, and so that's kind of where the idea of who the characters were came from.
And I love how, Evan you have these experiences where Evan has all these friends, but some of them are kids that maybe he doesn't like very much, or aren't very kind to him maybe, or so he has these other conflicts with these other interpersonal relationships, whereas Jessie has Evan. Right.
She just has Evan. Yeah.
And she's very logical and she thinks through her problems in this very step-by-step methodical way.
Yeah.
Whereas Evan, it feels like he's very emotional.
And my kids, like my middle boy, at the time the book came out, he said, "I'm Evan, right? You based Evan on me." And then my daughter's like, "I'm Jessie, right? You based Jessie on me." I really didn't. Because the truth is, they're both based on me. When I was a kid, I think I was very much like Jessie, in terms of liking that precision, liking the math, liking A leads to B, B leads to C. Just things worked out like that. As I've gotten older, I've tried to become more like Evan. I hope I'm managing that. We'll see. So yeah, they're everybody's me. Everybody in my books is me.
Well, I think that I feel like
including the not nice people. Scott Spencer. Scott Spencer is me.
I do the same thing with when I'm drawing or writing or what have you. Everybody is me a little bit.
Yeah.
Especially since literally I'm doing a lot of. I'm taking a lot of self-reference photos when I'm drawing characters, so I'm doing a lot of the poses, a lot of the acting. So literally, in some cases, the characters come out as me as well. But don't they have to be
a little bit? I feel like if as an author you create a character and you can't find a single thread in that character that you say, that's part of me, the good and the bad. Mm-hmm. I feel like you can never really know that character, and so how can you really? I don't know, how can you really fully portray that character if you don't have even one little shred that you can relate to? That's how I feel. I always put a little piece of me into all the characters.
I'm very much doing that. And it's also funny, adapting a work that wasn't mine originally, but I did read when I was a kid. I read the Babysitter's Club books when I was a kid. So it's a different experience when you're reading the books and experiencing the characters in that way versus writing the characters and creating the things that they're doing, because I can't tell you how many times I put the characters on the page and they're either being, I don't know, petty or selfish or whatever.
me.
Right? I'm like, I resemble this and I don't like it.
We show our ugly sides.
Speaking of the emotional lives of these characters, that's the emotion, that's the through line of the story.
That's the most important thing of it.
That's certainly what drew me into the story and these characters was the interpersonal emotional relationship between them. But at the same time, you're also giving a business lesson.
Yeah.
So where did that come from?
So, it's so funny because people say to me, librarians, teachers, they say, that was so smart of you to put all that business stuff in, because we can do all kinds of cross-curricular, projects with it, and we use it in math, and we use it in this, and it was just so smart of you to put all that business stuff in there. And I'm thinking, man, I wasn't thinking about that at all. There was no way I was thinking, oh, teachers and librarians will love to use the book in the classroom because there's all this wonderful business material that they can use. I just did it because that's what I like. That's what I was interested in making money when I was a kid. I started making, when I was 10 years old, I would make decoupage plaques out of scrap pieces of wood that my dad had, and old greeting cards. I would just cut off the back and glue it on and sell them in a local consignment shop. And then I moved on to making stuffed animals, and I sold those in the consignment shop. And then I gathered up all the extra clothing that my whole family had, and I washed it and I mended it and I sold it in the Wellesley College. Once a year they had so I was always interested in schemes for making money, and so that was just me. And I thought,
this is a super organic
yes,
story that comes from you.
I wasn't thinking about that as an element in the story. It was just sort of something I would have been interested in that age, and Jessie is clearly interested in that age, so it just like made sense.
I feel like those are the best kinds of stories when, I don't know, I know that some authors will, write for their younger selves, or some authors are, really, really thinking about the audience, thinking about who it is that they're writing for, and some authors just write what they want to write at that moment. Are you thinking about your audience at all when you're writing, or are you just essentially, this is the story that I have inside me, and this is what happens?
Yeah, I'm just thinking about me. All the time thinking about me. No, when I get into a story, the audience isn't existing anymore, because if they were, I'd be like
too self-conscious.
It would just be like self-referential. So when I really get into a story, it's just the characters. It's just the characters and the setting, and of course everything I carry with me through my whole life. But no, I don't think about the audience. I know that other people do and do it very well, but I think that would get in my way.
I fully understand that.
Yeah.
I very much create for myself and hope that the audience will come.
Yeah. Sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't.
Right. But we're just about at 7:30, so I can ask you more questions, or I don't know if you want to move on to our dramatic reading.
We should move on. Yeah, we have all kinds of things planned.